What do you think of when you hear the word environment? Well, different people have different perceptions of the environment. It can depend on their job, their education, which region of the world they come from, which family they were raised in. It'll really skew their perception of the environment. And so this is really important while doing creation care ministry, because you have your own perceptions of the environment, and then when you talk about it, you're talking to other people who might have very different perceptions of the environment. So this here, this teaching now, has to do with what are these different perceptions? And as you're more conscious of the other person's perception, you can tune the conversation to join them where they are, and then also open them to other possibilities. So there was research that was done by some researchers in the 90s, and they asked the question, what's your typical representation of the environment? Or actually, that was not the exact question, but we asked them what does the word environment mean for you? And then people wrote down their answers, and then they made categories. And these are the categories I'm going to explain right away. So the first one, oh yeah, and every time I'll be explaining it from the point of view of a tree, but it's like one creature and then go on to the wider environment. So we can consider the tree as a resource. We can consider the whole environment as a resource. People, when we ask them, what is the environment, because of their job, probably, or their view of the world, they see the whole environment as a fridge or a back store, or it's like this place where you just go, you get the resources, and then you come out. Our whole economy is based on that. Well, a big chunk of the economy is resource-based. Okay, something doesn't really have value until you go and extract it, and then it starts moving and has value in the economy. Before that, it doesn't have any value. So this perception is anthropocentric. There's the human being at the center, looking at all the resources and wanting to exploit them. Now, is this good or bad? It's only a bad perception when it's the only perception you have, when someone is obsessed by that way of looking at the environment. I'll continue, and the more I develop, the more you'll get the idea. Now, this is actually the other side of the coin. The tree or the environment can now be perceived as a problem. Okay, some people we ask, you hear the word environment, what's the first thing that comes to mind? It's a problem. There are lots of problems. There are lots of challenges, lots of issues. Okay, and they need to be solved. Or I'm not the one who's going to solve them. At first glance, this might seem like a good thing. Okay, there are problems, we want to solve them. Okay, great. But just stopping to the fact that the environment is perceived as a problem can be very, very negative as time goes on. I'll give you an example. When I was around 5 or 6 years old, my parents, it was a day off, and we went near the river. Now, I grew up in a suburb where there was no water body where I was. We have to drive a few kilometers to get to the river. I was used to concrete and asphalt and bricks, and that was my local environment. A bunch of trees, but still, no water body. So we get to the river, and then I'm a young boy, and I'm all impressed and really happy to be close to the river. And so I just walk to the side, and I come and I want to dip my hand in the water. Both my parents take my arms, they bring me back really quick, and they say, "No, don't do that. The water's polluted. It's bad. Don't touch it." So what were they teaching me that day? They were teaching me that this water, the environment, is bad. And when we always get, talking about air pollution and water pollution and soil pollution and don't eat that and don't eat this and don't go there and don't touch that. Well, we're teaching our kids that, being in contact with the environment is not good. It's a problem. And so what happens when they become teenagers and adults? Oh, we prefer to stay between four walls because that seems to be safer. Just plug into technologies rather than being outside in contact with the rest. Okay? So recognizing that the environment, there are problems there, that's good. But when we only think that the environment is a problem, well, then we're missing out on so many other things. And also, there's a tendency of considering it's a problem for humans. But when it might be a problem for other living things, it's not considered. So that's why it's a very anthropocentric perception of the environment. Moving on to the tree in my neighborhood. Now, this research was done in French, and this third one was actually called in French milieu de vie, which is kind of tough to translate. It's the living environment, the place you live, basically. Milieu de vie, the place you live. And I translated directly into neighborhood because that's usually what we recognize as being the place we live. So come out of my home and I walk to go take the bus, and then I recognize this big oak tree, and I recognize the squirrels jumping around, and I recognize some of the buildings, and I feel related to all of these things around. It's my neighborhood. And if something was going to happen to it, well, I'd want to care for it. Or at least I would expect other people to care for it. It's still anthropocentric, though. And here's an example where people are just obsessed by this type of perception of the environment. Let's say the oak tree I was talking about was maybe infected by a bug. It was getting sicker. Some branches might fall if the wind goes is too fast on a given day. And so the city decides to say, okay, we have to cut down this 150-year-old oak tree. And the reasons might be very good. But then people who are so used to looking at it and are related to it now say, no, this is irresponsible. We can't do that. Don't cut that tree. No. So it's really interesting to have the sense that you're related to your neighborhood and things you know and used to and you love them. But then you also need a broader understanding of safety and even ecology, because that tree can then infect other oak trees that might be around, and then we lose them all. So it would be proper management from the city, but then people react very badly to that. So it's great to be related to the rest, but again, let's not obsess on only one perception of the environment. Here's another one. We asked people, what is the environment for you? And some people who were part of green teams or other environmental groups, they would answer that, well, for me, environment is a project. It's a community project. And they would describe how happy they were to be related to other people working on a project and looking at the environment at a given time and then moving that towards a new, richer environment. And it was thanks to their involvement. So that's great, and that's beautiful. I won't really describe how that can be bad, because people don't tend to obsess too much about that one. But it's just important to know that there are others. And so let's move on. The tree as part of the biosphere. Okay, we ask the person, what's the environment for you? And then the person starts describing how climate change works or how an ecosystem works. It's this web of interrelations between living and non-living things. So we ask, what is this tree? And then the person starts imagining the roots and how the roots are connected to other things in the soil. And then the leaves take the CO2 and breathe out some oxygen. And depending on the type of tree, there must be an amount of water underneath, and then starts imagining that. It's a very scientific point of view. And so to be ecocentric is to understand that living things are related to each other with the non-living things as well. So this is great to perceive it that way, but I've also met some people who would only perceive the environment in a scientific way, which kind of made it a bit dry. And sometimes they would understand it scientifically, but then did it really go into their heart and it changed their ways of acting? Not necessarily either. So it's important to have this perception, and let's move on to another one. Biocentric. Okay, bio means life. So the tree is part of nature, and it's to be respected, it's to be loved. We have a picture of tree huggers right here. Okay, so who is the most renowned saint who had a biocentric approach? Well, St. Francis of Assisi, calling the other creatures around brothers and sisters. And biocentrism really helps us find the intrinsic value of life around us. So to have this perception is very positive. But brought to the extreme, radical biocentrism, we find that in a way of thinking called deep ecology. Deep ecology is present in the US. It's also present in parts of Europe. I'm from Canada, so I haven't really felt it here, but I've read stuff from elsewhere where it is a problem. And biocentrism is a huge problem because, radical biocentrism, because then you start looking at life and then everything is on the same level. All forms of life, the ant, the worm, the bird, the human being, the whale, they're all on the same plane. So there's this fear of destroying any type of life. That obviously is not even considering that there is predation in nature and that it is a part of the way nature works. But then also, and this is the worst part, this focus, this obsession on every life brings this reaction where, well, finally the human being is kind of like an infection. Humanity is an infection on Earth because we're destroying so many things. And so, good riddance if humans aren't there anymore. I mean, that's a huge loss of solidarity for one's own species. It's the loss of faith in humanity to be able to grow and to be able to learn from mistakes and improve. It's very dangerous. So a biocentric approach, kind of like Francis of Assisi, just to start appreciating life around, that's great. When it becomes an obsession, that's when it starts to be a problem. And the last one I'm presenting is called, it's to perceive the environment as creation. The tree is seen as a creature of God. And it's theocentric. So this one is very different from all the other ones. Because now it's God who's at the center of my perception of the environment. Okay? So we started off with human beings looking at their environment, anthropocentric, looking at it as a resource or anything. And then we move on to sociocentric and biocentric and ecocentric. And now we finish with this one. When people hear the environment and they believe in God as creator, well, then all of a sudden I'm a part of this creation. And there's a certain sacredness in the balance that's all around that I have to take care of. It's seen as a gift or What is my role now? Well, I'm a steward of this creation. Contemplation, it then brings us closer to God. Okay, just like you look at an art piece and many art pieces from the same artist, you start getting to know the artist in a certain way. It leads you to the artist. Well, contemplating creation brings us closer to the Creator. This one too, when it's just obsessed, can cause other problems. Just talk to people who are creationists. So, look at this. Typical representations of the environment. I showed many different pictures representing these different perceptions. And I hope the takeaway message after all of this is that all of these perceptions are valid. Okay? When I have a garden in the back of my home, of course it's the environment perceived as a resource. I'm going to go pluck those tomatoes when they're ripe and I'm going to eat them. It's the environment perceived as a resource. Sometimes it's a problem and it can bring me to act. It's a community project. It's an ecosystem where everything is related. We have to broaden our understanding of the environment with all these representations. And there might be one that you prefer and you live by, but also be conscious that others exist, and when you have conversations with others, you can open them and present them another approach to the environment.